So welcome to a new episode of Building the Open Web. Today we have David Vorick. Thank you for joining today.
Thanks, glad to be here.
And maybe can you provide a little bit of a background on yourself? What are you working on today?
Sure. Yes, I am the lead developer of a project called Skynet, which is a decentralized web application platform. So we're kind of trying to take the internet and create a new data model where users own the data instead of corporations, but you can still have applications that can use all the data. So you can have a Twitter where all the tweets are owned by the users, or a YouTube where all the videos are owned by users.
And where did you grow up overall?
So I grew up in Chicago, in the suburbs, and then I went to college in New York, upstate New York, at Rensselaer Polytechnic, and I finally we started our company, which is Nebulous Labs at the time, in Boston. So I guess I've bounced around a bit.
Nice. And how did you get interested in a space to begin with?
So freshman year of college, one of my friends just popped their head into my dorm room while I was working. He was like, "David, you'd really like Bitcoin." And then he popped his head out and ran away. And that was it. So I was like, "What is Bitcoin?" I Googled it, and I went deep down the rabbit hole. This is in 2011. So it was very early on, and I got sucked in. And pretty much ever since, I've spent every waking hour working on Bitcoin or cryptocurrency.
Nice. And how did the idea about starting your own project in space came about?
Yeah, I think a lot of engineers have this when they first read about Bitcoin. They're like, "Oh man, this is super inefficient, and we could do so much better." So I had the same thought. So originally, the Sia project was an attempt to make a better Bitcoin. We thought we could do something that was more scalable and had better decentralization properties. We figured out by 2014 that Bitcoin actually is difficult to innovate on, at least from a scalability perspective. So we pivoted to being focused specifically on decentralized storage. And then more recently with Skynet, we've pivoted on to being a Web3 platform, and building a foundation for Web3 applications.
Got it. I see. And so what's the difference between the storage solution, the Sia itself, and Skynet?
So the storage solution, Sia, is a blockchain protocol. I guess we'd think of it as the L1. And it is mostly about storing data. It's about forming contracts with hosts, and it's very low level. Whereas Skynet is a file sharing layer on top of Sia, and it's a series of APIs that support not just file sharing, but also full-featured applications. It supports uploading and downloading data. It supports mutable data, and it supports just like it works out of your web browser, so it supports the entire JavaScript runtime. So Skynet is kind of like our layer 2, I guess, would be one way to think about it, and it's just it's much more powerful overall.
And do you see so far a lot of interest from developer community in Skynet?
Oh yes, so much. So pretty much as soon as we announced Skynet in February, the number of developers in our community exploded. A lot of people are super excited to be working on their Skynet apps, and we've seen things like live streaming. We've seen things like chat rooms. We've seen things like blogs and blogging, media galleries. I think someone's working on a Dropbox. So yeah, just a ton of stuff has come forward, and there's been a ton of energy. So yes, we've been very excited to see all the activity on top of Skynet.
And the use case, would you say, are kind of like across the board, or you mentioned a couple of them? Like, do you see particular trends into like what kinds of things people are building?
Yeah, so definitely, I would say the trends are much more on social media. rather than on finance, which I think is, um, the more in the spirit of Web3 than it is necessarily in, say, like DeFi or cryptocurrency specifically. And the cryptocurrency is a super critical part to how Skynet works. We would not have Skynet if we did not have a blockchain. But the types of things that are being built are more, the decentralized Reddit, decentralized Imgur, decentralized chat. It's social things.
And from your perspective, like I remember you wrote the post about war for a free internet. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the blog post, the kind of like spirit of it? Like, what is the value behind it? Like, what are you fighting for essentially?
I remember, and I kind of lay this out in the blog post, but I remember just feeling so much freedom on the internet as a child, because, and maybe not so much at like an 8-year-old child, but maybe more like 13 through 17. Most of my experience in high school with the internet was independent forums run by various communities, or independent gaming sites. And so every website was kind of self-owned and self-contained, and self-operated, right? They had server costs and had donation drives to fund the server costs. And what that meant was it was just really free, and really creative. But whereas today, most of my experience on the internet is uh, aggregates. So it'd be like, gaming happens on aggregate websites like Congregate, or the forums have largely moved to things like Reddit, which is again just a big aggregator, and it feels a lot more constricted. And especially things like YouTube, or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat, um, are these massive platforms where corporations own all of your data, and they really control and constrict the flow of information. And I think it hurts creativity. People are a lot more wary. I think everyone knows in the back of their mind that the corporations are watching you, and that kind of changes the types of things you're comfortable saying, even subconsciously. It really does change the conversation, I think. So, people are a lot more open, for example, on encrypted platforms like Signal. Um, and so the war for a free internet is really like, we should take the data back into users' control. We should give them privacy. We should get the corporate, like the omnipresent eyes of the corporations out of here, and we should open up the internet again to being user owned and community owned, and uh, communities choose their own rules.
And how, well, like, why do you think internet evolved in this direction? We started in a place where it was a lot of creativity, and then we got to today. Like, what was the main kind of driving force?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the cloud, honestly. And the cloud was this amazing invention that just made it super easy to run a community. And so, some of the things in the past, like admins running their own servers, that's a technical challenge. It's a difficult thing to do, and it costs money. And the cloud eliminated both of those problems. And so it's a lot easier. It's a lot more scalable. Increasingly, as we get more connected, you have phenomena like things going viral. And if you are, an independent website, and you have a video go viral, that can be extremely expensive for you. But if it's on YouTube, it's expensive for YouTube in a way that YouTube is able to handle. So I think, just the infrastructure layer of that, but also the convenience of having, one login, a single sign on, whether it's Google or Facebook. And just, the cloud made it a lot easier to be on the internet. And I think that's a powerful thing, and that in itself is a good thing. It's just that we lost a lot to get the cloud. And so the point of Skynet is to augment the cloud, to give you everything that the cloud gives you, but to also give you more freedom of data and more, just more privacy. The ability to go back to these contained communities, while still retaining all the advantages of the cloud.
Hmm. And do you think that people who today care about it, is it mostly builders and it's on them to build experiences that people would use that are like comparable to existing like social media experiences, but just with different properties? Or is it up to end users? Because I do know that, for example, like DuckDuckGo traffic is like kind of skyrocketing. So there is, you're right, like maybe there is, it's bigger part of everyone's awareness today. But do you think it's ultimately up to builders? So is it also like end users need to understand kind of like what comes with this?
Yeah, so actually, I think that's the most exciting thing about Skynet, and the reason that I'm so just determined to see Skynet through is that I think it comes down to builders, and I think that fundamentally Skynet is a more powerful platform than the centralized web. We can get into that a little bit more later, but the high level idea is that because data is free and open, applications can be a lot more powerful. So today on the internet, all the data is locked into these individual silos. Like you have Facebook and you have your friends on Facebook, but your friends on like YouTube can't access your Facebook friends. Snapchat can't access your Facebook friends. And there's all this data on Twitter and all this data on Twitch, and all that data is compartmentalized and it's locked into these individual corporate silos. Whereas on Skynet, all the data is owned by users. And so on Skynet, my decentralized Imgur and my decentralized Twitch and my decentralized, IRC, all the data for all of that is in this open space that any application can tap into. And what that means is that developers can, for example, if you have an idea on how to improve decentralized YouTube, you can launch your own decentralized YouTube and immediately have access to all the videos, all the users, all the content, all the comments, all the chat. And so, on the centralized web, if you want to launch an improvement to YouTube, you start with nothing. You have no videos and no users, and so users will come to your platform and find an empty experience, and you have to build an ecosystem from scratch. That's extremely difficult to do. But on Skynet, that problem disappears, and if you have an idea, you're immediately launching into an ultra rich data ecosystem. So we overcome the flywheel problem of modern web startups. And I think that's going to make Skynet completely unstoppable.
And how do you think it will evolve over the next couple of years? Like, what are the kinds of builders who are attracted today, and how do you think, like, how do we bring more builders in space? Also, is another good question.
So I think the most important thing is to just start building. And we're gonna, now that we have something that works really well, we're gonna be putting a lot more marketing behind it. I know historically we were known for not doing much marketing, but I think that's because we haven't had much that was worth marketing. But now, now that Skynet's in place, things are a lot more exciting. And I think that, over the next probably 12 months, we're going to see a lot of things that are just decentralized alternatives to existing services. So kind of like what I said, we have a decentralized, IRC, decentralized Imgur. And so that's a lot of low hanging fruit. And so I think over the next year, we're just going to be building a lot of really easy stuff. But then, we have new forms of decentralized ID that's being worked on as well. And I think, after the first year, we're going to start seeing types of applications come forward that aren't just alternatives to the centralized web. They're augmentations that use this open data model. And we're going to start seeing, whatever the next version of Facebook is, right? The same way that Facebook wasn't a better MySpace. It's its own thing, and Snapchat wasn't a better Facebook. It's its own thing. We're gonna see a new type of social media that the centralized web just can't replicate. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but I know that there's a lot more power there, and because there's a lot more power there, I believe that someone will figure out how to use it, and we'll be able to take Skynet and defeat the giants like Facebook.
Got it. Have quick couple technical questions too from our engineering team too. What is the latency for uploading a file and being able to access it by the hash?
Yeah, so uploading a file depends on the size, but latency is typically, I want to say, like 3 to 5 seconds. And once you get the hash back, any Sia node or any Skynet node specifically can access that file. So it's quite fast.
Nice. And can you also upload and download files straight from the browser using some JS library?
Yep. So we have a SDK, and our huge focus. So initially, when we launched Skynet, we had several languages that we were supporting, but we've really narrowed that down. I think we really want to focus on the web ecosystem, and so the JavaScript SDK is by far our best supported library, and it's what we put the most energy into.
Interesting. And how do you think also about intersection of what you're building and also like the kind of blockchain ecosystem? Or do you think of Sia also as a like blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, Sia is a blockchain, right? So we intersect somewhere, and specifically, uh, there are a couple of interesting, I think, properties to Sia as a blockchain. One of them being it's a true utility token. So Skynet runs on money, and specifically it runs on Sia Coin, which means as long as there are people using Skynet, and there are other Sia uses as well, but as long as people are using the Sia protocol, there is inherent demand for Sia Coin, which I think is fairly different from any other cryptocurrency. It's like if you build a social media empire on top of Skynet, you're not going to have a billion users switch overnight. Those billion users are going to need Siacoin and are going to be continuously spending Siacoin. And that means that you can't have this, falls falls to zero kind of mechanism. There's no, it's just a much more stable economy. So I think that is very interesting. And then we have some other like features to the protocol that I think make Sia financially unique within the blockchain ecosystem. But that's not really our focus at this point. We're really mostly excited about um, enhancing Web3.
Yep. And how do we overall bring more developers in the space?
So I think that it starts just by showing them what to do. I think um, developers just they like building. They have ideas. They want to execute those ideas, and if you give them a tool chain that either makes their lives easier or and what we're really focused on, it allows them to do things that were never possible before. Um, they'll get very excited about it, and they'll come in. And so I think already, Skynet's been doing a really good job of that. We've our developer community is growing very rapidly, and I think that is owed entirely to the two aspects of one. There are things you can do on Skynet that you could never do before, and then two, we've worked incredibly hard to make it as simple as possible. Our just as an example, our SDK is as simple as import Skynet, Skynet.upload, Skynet.download. And so with 3 lines of code, you're using the most important features of Skynet. And so there's a very very low learning curve. It's your natural JavaScript environment. It runs in the web browser, and I think that brings a lot of people in. Um, in terms of like what you can do that you could never do before, deploying a web app on Skynet is as simple as just uploading it to Skynet. There are plenty of portals that'll let you do that for free, and then that's it. Once it's uploaded to Skynet, it runs itself, and so you don't have to have a server. You don't have to have an account with a cloud. You don't have bills to worry about. The users pay for the app to exist, and as long as you have users on your application, that application will have a life of its own. You don't actually have to be involved anymore. And I think a lot of developers are very excited about just how easy it is to build things on top of Skynet and deploy them.
Hmm. And when it comes to also getting some users, do you think there are particular skill sets that are required for those teams building on top of Skynet? Is it like product skill sets, or like people who like have done entrepreneurship before and kind of have like intuitive sense for how to get users? Like how do you think about that?
Yeah. So I think that right now we're mainly worried about just getting the basic apps built. But as the ecosystem evolves, maybe like 6 months from now, absolutely, it will. The products that get the most attention will be the ones that have the cleanest design, the cleanest UX, and then have their own marketing, right? So I do think that ultimately Skynet will be won by entrepreneur types who aren't just making a product; they're making an ecosystem, and they're not just making an application; they're making like a full product, and they're bringing it to market. Um, and so I do think that eventually we will have where eventually is like not just a couple months, we will have just very startup minded people joining and building on Skynet.
And when you think like if you put yourself in mind of hypothetical like kind of entrepreneurial team approaching new opportunities, kind of like thinking about what to build in 2020, do you think kind of like Web3 becoming this like one of the most viable options? Because I mean, like, what are your alternatives? You can go build normal consumer web app. Go good luck competing with like aggregators or like enterprise software company like that has been kind of like done for like 20 years. Do you see like Web3 already becoming like a lot more exciting choice to begin with, or do you think we have to do a lot of like awareness on that front still?
Yeah, so I think we probably have to do awareness. So before Skynet, Web3 has been more difficult to build on. If you look at, I think my favorite Web3 app right now is Mastodon. I think they've been very successful. They've had to deal with an enormous number of technical challenges, and I think they've done a very good job of approaching those challenges without making the experience too user hostile. But it's still just like a really difficult version of Twitter. It's harder to use, and just because of the federated nature of Mastodon. So first of all, it's not even fully decentralized. It's just federated, and then second of all, the trade-offs they had to make to the user experience to get the federation working, it's just noticeably more annoying to use than Twitter. And so I think a lot of entrepreneurs today, when they think about, should I make a Web3 app, they're like, no, it doesn't scale as well. It's going to be a worse user experience. It's users are convenience minded, not privacy minded. And Skynet, I think, is really the flip there. Skynet makes it possible to build a decentralized Twitter that is easier than centralized Twitter, that onboards faster, that has a richer ecosystem, and is more connected. So I think there's some awareness that needs to happen, but I also have full confidence that it will happen.
Hmm. What is the difference between federated model that Mastodon have and like truly decentralized model?
So where I would draw the line at federated is federated means that there are a set of controlling servers that kind of manage the experience for a user. So in the specific case of Mastodon, you have different servers. Each server has their own set of users. And so if whatever server you're on, if that server shuts down, that portion of the Mastodon ecosystem disappears. So all those accounts disappear, all those tweets disappear, all that content disappears. And so, because there are lots of servers in the federation, there are no single points of failure, but each point of failure takes things with it. Whereas on Skynet, it's fully decentralized. If we have things called portals. If a portal shuts down, all you need to do is go use a different portal. And so if you create an account on Skynet, it doesn't matter which portal you're accessing Skynet from. You will have this exact same account and the exact same data, and you will have access to the full Skynet ecosystem. And so that's the key difference, is that if you're a user on Skynet, no matter how you're accessing Skynet, or no matter who you're using or what portal you're using to get into Skynet, um, everything is available and the user experience is identical across the whole ecosystem. And so, um, and from the user perspective, I think that's just way more powerful.
And also, I had a quick question also about economics of it. Uh, how how do you get to the place where it's cheap enough to be viable, but at the same time, like you also probably need to have a lot of replicas of data, right, to begin with. So how does that work?
Yeah. So we're not terribly concerned about the economics at this point. As it were, like Sia has really good economics, and I can go into why. But even if it didn't, I think that with Skynet, the data model is so powerful that users would be happy to use it anyway. Basically, just in general, storage is extremely cheap. Even if you're using Amazon S3, it's $20 per month per terabyte. And so if you're doing something like blogging, you can fit several billion blog posts onto 1 terabyte. And so you can have an ecosystem of literally billions of blog posts, and it costs $20 a month to operate. And that's on the expensive side of things. So Sia is around a tenth of that. It's $2 per terabyte per month. But like in the context of Skynet, where most of the content and most of the data is just people talking to each other, um, it's essentially free. The infrastructure is free, and so we're really not worried about the economics at this point. As long as you're willing to sign up and pay $5 a month or something to access the server, to access Skynet, the service. Most of that $5 is not going to infrastructure. It's going to the developers, and not us, the developers. Some of it goes to us, but like the people who made the decentralized imgur will be getting a cut if you use decentralized imgur, or the publishers who wrote blog posts. They'll be getting a cut of that $5. And so yeah, we're much more concerned not about infrastructure, but more about how do we make sustainable content without advertising.
And what is the biggest challenge there?
So the biggest challenge is that we haven't set up PayPal, or just there's no way to pay for Skynet yet. So right now it's completely free, because we've been focused on building. So we just released something called SkyDB, and that I think is the most important feature we will ever release, just hands down. So we've been focused on other things. Now that that's out, we're switching back to focusing on letting people pay. And so I think the biggest, I don't know if I would call it a challenge, I would call it a risk. We have this idea in our heads that people will be willing to pay for access to Skynet, and it'll work kind of like a utility bill, kind of like you pay for electricity. So you log into Skynet, you have an account, and then as you browse and you use Skynet in the background, like it's invisible to the user. The user's not being like, they're not seeing that they're being charged every page they access, but they know in their head and in the background that there's a bill that's counting up, but at a reasonable rate. And so at the end of the month, depending on how much they use Skynet, they'll get a bill for like say $3, $5, $20, and that's a model that we've just been assuming will be acceptable, and that we'll be able to get working. But we haven't actually deployed it yet, so we don't know if that's gonna be the right way to approach funding Skynet.
And from the users, well, it's probably hard to say at this point, but do you think that the right mental model for the users will be like you're paying for storage, or is it you're paying for this data? You have data model that's very powerful now. It's like interoperable. You can use it in so many places on the internet now.
Yeah. So in the user side, you're really paying for the data, and so it's like, when you go and visit a blog post, you're paying not for the bandwidth and storage, but you're paying for the content itself. The vast majority of the payment when you load a blog post is going to the person who wrote the blog post, the person who created the software that published the blog post, and then of course us as well. And the person who linked you to the blog post, there'll be there's a referral system in place there. And so I think from the user perspective, yeah, you're just paying for you're paying for the experience, not necessarily the infrastructure. There's a lot more that goes into the experience than just storage and bandwidth.
Got it. And what would be your main focus for next year overall?
Yeah. So just doing everything we can to uh, give developers um, the most powerful and easy to use toolkit that we can give them. And so I think we're intending to roll Skynet out in 3 phases. We have 2 phases done. So we had the idea for Skynet in November. Then we launched phase 1 in February, which is this content layer. Then was it only a week ago? It was 1 week ago. We launched SkyDP, which is the database layer and the mutable content layer. And then hopefully by the end of the year, so we're targeting the end of the year, we'll have the content monetization layer, which is what allows content creators, developers, any of the builders or creators on the ecosystem to get paid when users are using their content. We're going to be rolling that out. And once phase 3 is out, everything else we switch into like maintenance mode. And so we'll be focused entirely on things like making it faster. Or if we notice that developers are struggling with a certain part of the ecosystem, making a library to help them out. So everything will be focused, hopefully starting, January of next year. The full vision of Skynet will be done, and everything will be focused on just making what we have a lot better.
And also, how do you manage the demand right now that you're experiencing so much demand from the builders? Like what is a good way to kind of manage this inflow of interest?
Yeah, so we're figuring that out. Before we launched Skynet, I was able to completely keep up with the ecosystem and read every message, and so it was very easy for me to know what everyone wanted. That's no longer possible. Our community is so active these days that yeah, if I read every message, I don't have time to do the rest of my job. So I think you just have to step back a little bit. You have to identify who are the key players in the space, and you have to just stay high touch with those people, and kind of use them to get a sense of everything else that's going on in the ecosystem. But mostly from the community perspective, it's making sure that everyone has a place to get set up, everyone has a place to ask questions, everyone has access to technical support. And I mean, that's one of the great things about the community is that if you ask a technical question, it doesn't have to be a Skynet dev who answers you. There will be someone else who knows the answer to your question, and they'll just step in. And I think that's really important for getting Skynet off the ground. And so far, it's something that's not been challenging for ecosystem.
And have you applied like any mental models around building communities that works really well, or maybe read some books about it, or maybe particular tools? Like what was helpful so far in terms of community building and making it thriving?
That's a good question. So I have a long history of building communities. So I don't know that I have read specific books about it, but like the very first community I ran, I think I was 10 years old. Is that right? Maybe I was 12. But I set up a forum, and I paid $10 a month to a site called x10hosting.com. And so I ran a forum with a bunch of friends. And then throughout high school, I ran various like multiple video game forums, and forums for other communities. So I think probably like 7 or 8 total. And then in college, I ran several forums as well, to separate communities. So in total, throughout my life, not including the Sia community, I've probably spun up over 10 communities. Some of which are still thriving today. Some of which have moved on. But so I would just say a lot of it comes from intuition and comes from having seen communities unfold previously. And so I think it's a lot of community management from my perspective is a lot of identifying which people have uh, the most respected voices, and watching the opinions of those people, and then making sure that it's a welcoming place. Oh, okay. Making sure that it's a welcoming place, making sure that they have an attitude that you want the rest of the community to be in, and I think most of the time people are super reasonable. If someone's acting out of turn, or is like is just being disruptive, all you got to do is message them. And so I think yeah, management on our end comes down a lot too, just knowing everybody at a personal level and kind of using these like soft power dynamics to control how the community operates.
Got it. And for the builders, what's the fastest? What's a good place for them to get started on Skynet overall? Like, where do they find everything about Skynet?
Yeah. So the best place to go if you're getting started is our Discord. That's discord.gg/Sia, SIA, and then there's a Skynet channel. And if you pop in there and you're just like, I heard about Skynet, I think it's cool, I want to build, you'll get help, within minutes. So someone will be there to teach you how to build a web app. And we have some links and stuff, some blog posts and some demos. But yeah, the Discord is easily there's a ton of activity, a ton of really smart people building amazing things, and everyone's really eager to get this. Because again, unlike the centralized web on Skynet, when a new application joins the network, everybody wins because the data on that application goes into a global pool. It's not like someone makes a Twitter clone and then starts eating away at Twitter's market share. When you make a new Twitter on Skynet, all that data is available to everybody. So the existing applications all win from you being there. And so it just completely changes there's no competitive dynamic. It's a much more collaborative environment. And because everybody wins, like everybody wants to see your project succeed.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for joining today. That was a fascinating conversation.
Thank you. Glad to be here.